Welcome to learning about Reading Core, the K-3 level. So our goal is to have all children have the opportunity to be proficient readers by third grade. When we think about third grade reading proficiency, we know that we have a phase of learning to read versus reading to learn. So in those early grades, we're trying to make sure kids are very proficient in their basic skills. So almost 3/4 of children who read poorly in third grade continue to read poorly in high school, making third grade reading proficiency a key predictor of high school dropout rate. The number of students served by Reading Core has grown dramatically over the years. Most recently, we've had 9,191 pre-K students and 27,870 K-3 students. When we look at Minnesota as our home state, you can see that a variety of states have copied the Reading Core model, and allowing us to now reach the 37,000 students nationwide. We're growing all the time. The University of Chicago finds that Minnesota Reading Core is replicable, and they have studied this across looking at different member backgrounds, including their age, gender, race, years of education, and universally the program is effective. There are 2 levels to Reading Core, pre-K and K-3. The K-3 is the focus for this presentation. The crux of the model is that tutors provide one-on-one 20-minute daily sessions to their students. It is one-on-one tutoring, and there's a structure of support for the tutors. The blue rectangle here shows you the title of Master Coach. A Master Coach supports multiple schools, and they support directly somebody called the School Internal Coach. The School Internal Coach in the red here is an employee of the building. And that employee is either trained in reading interventions, intervention, assessment, prevention, say special education, Title I, school psychology, anything related to assessment, intervention, and supports. That internal coach is a key person in supporting the next person in the yellow circle, the tutor and the students directly at the building. Now, this team of people works together across the 3 circles in the bottom. We use data-driven decision-making as far as who we service in Reading Core and then monitor their progress over time. We use the second circle, evidence-based literacy interventions. We train our tutors in specific reading practice that they then deliver, and we observe frequently to check the final circle, which is implementation fidelity. So Reading Core in action, we have the training first. We provide training to the internal coaches, master coaches, and tutors. They get trained in 4 standardized 1-minute reading assessments commonly used in a lot of our schools. The tutors and coaches also get trained in 10 reading interventions. The second bullet says fidelity, and fidelity observations are key. We do observations that include checklists for every assessment as well as intervention. And we do that post-training to make sure people are ready to go, but then we observe throughout the entire school year, at least twice a month, to make sure that tutors are delivering successfully with their students. Coaching is provided all year long to our schools, and daily tutoring is the key thing that students receive. Then weekly, there are 1-minute assessments given by the tutors, and that is entered into our data system. So then we have individual progress graphs for each child, and every month there's a data meeting with the coaches and the tutor. In the fall of the school year, a round of assessment called benchmarking is conducted to determine which students are going to be serviced by Reading Core. All the assessments are 1-minute assessments. They are administered according to the grade level of the students, so different assessments for different grade levels. They are all general outcome measures well supported by research and used to determine who will qualify for service. The training in those assessments has gone really well. You can see that in our fidelity checklists, we have a very high rate at which tutors can successfully administer those assessments. Reading Core is supposed to be one intervention within a school's response to intervention model or multi-tiered systems of support model. We know within that model that the data tends to be organized according to a stoplight system of green, yellow, and red. Students in the green are good to go with core instruction alone, and yellow and red need something on top of their core instruction. So Reading Core was designed to be a support system for those kids in the yellow in particular, and starting with kids who are close to where they're supposed to be, but not quite there. Remember that tutoring is being provided by a member, that's 20 minutes a day. It's very good practice, but it's not meant to be a replacement for a scope and sequence instructional intervention that might be happening for students in the red. But Reading Corps has successfully shown in its research that we can service students starting in the yellow and working into the red, as long as our coaches do a good job of aligning intervention to student needs. So it's important that we think through what resources students might be receiving. The internal coach position is really key to that. It's fine with Reading Corps if kids receive Reading Corps intervention on top of other interventions, such as Title I or other interventions in the building, as long as the internal coach feels like it's a complement and going to work well for the students. So the selection process is important because the internal coach can also determine the number of kids being served within that K-3 range. The second bullet says that there's a minimum requirement of 15 kids being served per day. And then it'll vary on the school as far as how many 20-minute sessions can be carved out of the schedule. But then the internal coach determines which grade levels those students are going to come from. So it doesn't have to be an equal number of kids across the different grades of K-3. Rather, there can be an emphasis, just depending on what the schedule allows and what other interventions might be happening in the building where the school may want to target a particular grade level. The target scores are a key part of what drives which students are selected for tutoring, as well as how students are dismissed from Reading Corps. The targets were derived using a statistical process correlating these scores with what a student would need to achieve a 20 on the ACT. So they're predicting college readiness. So these numbers help drive our whole system and sense of urgency around supporting our students. So in Reading Corps, like we said, we start with the students closest to target and work our way down. And a fall target of 8 would be a student that's in the green. So a student with a 7 or lower, all the way down to 0, could be a Reading Corps student. So across the different grades and different assessments, it's the same premise. If a student's at target, they're in the green, they're not eligible for Reading Corps. But if they're below the target, we could pick them up. The job of the tutor is to take suggested kids from the internal coach and assess them. So the internal coach should be using in-house existing data from the spring of the prior school year to suggest who they think are likely going to be students for Reading Corps. And they provide that list of students to the tutor. Then the tutor completes the screening process doing the assessments. So you can see in this example, the internal coach provided 10 kids from first, second, and third grade. And the tutor did the assessment and then sorted the data. So the first grade students, the fall target is 36. So a child with 35 and then down is listed here. The internal coach then uses their additional information about attendance, behavior, other supports the child might be receiving to determine which kids are going to be good candidates for Reading Corps. The scheduling is a key part, of course, of what drives a lot of the selection. For example, they may be wanting to service a lot of first grade students, but within the schedule throughout the school day, there really are only, let's say, 5 openings to service first graders. So the careful lens of that internal coach is to help think through those different obstacles and logistics to select the students. So the interventions are research-based interventions delivered daily for 20 minutes. They are all scripted. They are all following a model of direct, explicit instruction with minimal tutor talking and high rates of student responding. They all follow a standard treatment protocol structure, so there's always a script and a corresponding checklist. The internal coach and master coach do the selection of the interventions. That's not the job of the tutor. Our evidence shows that fidelity of the interventions is carried out pretty well by our tutors. You can see the overall fidelity is about 95% across the different interventions that we deliver. We observe our tutors post-training, but then we observe them every single month multiple times to make sure that that fidelity is maintained, making sure that our students are getting the highest quality instruction and practice possible. The schedule will vary across the schools. The key requirement is that students are seen every day for 20 minutes. It doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same time every day, but it does have to be a 20-minute session every single day. In this example, you'll see that we're also sensitive to when students might be getting their core instruction, and we don't want students to miss their teacher-led core instruction. Teacher-led is really the key thing. We know that in some schools, the teacher-led portion might be 20 minutes, and then students might be in a variety of small group times, in which case a student could get their reading core session as part of that time, as well as have sufficient time to participate in the other small group activities that might be happening during that reading block. So the schedule looks very different from school to school, as it should. Some schools have intervention times, and that's when kids might receive their tutoring. But it's typical that tutors are spread across K-3 to allow for the most flexibility in servicing as many students as possible around the schedule. The tutors monitor the progress of their students weekly by giving 1-minute assessments. They enter that data into our data system and produce an individual progress graph for each child. Then the coaches with the tutor review those graphs every month to look at student progress and talk about changes. We talked about fall benchmark assessment. We also conduct benchmarking in the winter and the spring. We benchmark the former Reading Core kids as well as the current Reading Core kids. And then on a weekly basis, we have assessments depending on the grade level of the student and the skill. So kindergartners are weekly assessed with letter sounds. First graders are initially weekly assessed with test of nonsense word, and then we add curriculum-based measurement as their instruction and skills change. Second and third graders are always assessed with curriculum-based measurement reading. So these assessments are very similar to what a lot of schools use, such as Ames Web and Dibbles, and the product that we use are the FAST passages. So this is an example of a kindergarten graph. So in their data system, the tutors are responsible for entering the initial score of the student. That will draw this gray line on the graph called the aim line. Then every week they're entering the student's score. This is a kindergarten graph, so they're entering the number of letter sounds the child read in a minute. Those are the green dots that you see on the graph. That then gets averaged into something called a trend line, which is the dashed blue line across the scores. The vertical lines are called the intervention lines and tell you at which point in time the child's receiving a particular intervention. So PB are the initials for phoneme blending. LSC is letter sound correspondence. Along the bottom, you see the blue bars, and that is representing the tutor log. So a full blue bar means the child got a full 20-minute tutoring session. In between the blue bars, sometimes you see gray, which represents times when sessions were missed. And if you hover, you'll see why the session was missed as entered by the tutor. So this allows us to carefully think about decision-making using not only our minutes, but also the progress of the student over time. When a student exits Reading Core, the tutor will indicate that on the graph as well. So this is an example of a third grade student who has exited Reading Core. To exit Reading Core, a student must have 3 to 5 consecutive scores above that gray aim line, and they must have a couple scores, 2 scores exactly, at the upcoming target for their grade level. That helps us feel more confident that they're going to maintain their skills post-tutoring. So when that exit criteria is matched, a tutor will enter an exit line on the graph, and then also progress monitor after that time. So tutoring stops, but they collect a data point once a week to check that the student's maintaining for 3 weeks, and then they also benchmark them in the following seasons to make sure that they're maintaining their skills. So in the winter and the spring, we conduct that benchmarking assessment for all the current and the former Reading Core students. Read at Home is another component of our program. When students are completing an intervention such as duet reading is a passage practice where they're receiving modeling and immediate correction with their tutor. When they complete a passage and they practice it in chunks, so it could take a student a couple sessions to complete an entire passage. But when the passage is completed, it's sent home and the child is supposed to read to someone at home 3 times. So everything sent in the Read at Home folder is what's been practiced in tutoring. We never send unpracticed materials with the hope that children can successfully show their families what they're doing. Our national results from 2017-18. This graph is showing you growth rate as well as the targeted growth rate. So a growth rate is how quickly we like a student to be progressing from week to week on their assessments. And this is at the unit of measurement. So in this first white horizontal row where you see average growth per week, 2.81 is the growth of the target of the growth of the Reading Core kids compared to the target of 1.21 sounds per week. So in every situation, what you see is that the average growth rate per week for Reading Corps kids is greater than the targeted growth rate. Here's another way to look at that data. So in the red line, you'll see a Reading Corps student. They started out in the fall at 75 words a minute, and then they ended in the spring at 134 words a minute. The target for their grade is to be at 100 words a minute in the fall. So that's a 25-point difference there. But then that progress is helping that child, is showing us that that child is catching up and growing at 1.78 words per week, which is faster. And that helps them then get to the actual target. So they ended up with just 1 point below the target of 135. So the average Reading Corps kid is starting below and catching up over the course of their tutoring. This is what a first grade, what the first grade growth rate looks like. And first grade CBMR assessments start in January and go to the spring of the school year. So again, in the winter, the average Reading Corps kid is at 29 words a minute, and they end the school year twice that at 61 words a minute. So in the winter, they're 23 points behind the target, but they make amazing progress. So they double their score and still are behind the target, but have made tremendous progress from where they started at a rate of 2 words a week. So when we look at the results in our K-3 settings, the sites that we've been servicing, there are 776 from our most recent program year, and we served 27,000 kids. 1,300 tutors were served, and then in our dosage data, we see that there's an average of 69 minutes per week. As far as demographics, we service English language learners, students from all different racial and ethnic backgrounds. And we know from our data dig that our students, our English language learners, grow at the same rate or faster than our native English speakers. So again, now understanding this table better, you should be able to see clearly how the average growth rate per week for Reading Corps kids is always higher than their targeted growth rate. So that means that our students are making more than a year's growth in a year's time, helping them close their own achievement gap. The surveys that we've given to administrators and school teachers have shown really great support for Reading Corps. They've reported that they agree that implementing Reading Corps has been a rigorous, aligned, and development appropriate system for their kids. It's become an integral part of their multi-tiered systems of support, and they felt that it's been a positive impact on their students and on their sites. Research has shown that students in Reading Corps are much less likely to end up in special education. In a quasi-experimental study done in the Minneapolis public schools, we found that students that were in Reading Corps were 3 times less likely to be referred to special ed compared to kids starting with the same low scores. So how does the progress of Reading Corps students compare to the progress of non-Reading Corps? So a rigorous randomized control trial was done looking at Reading Corps students compared to control students. So we had students randomly assigned a treatment and control, but matched on their initial score. And the kindergarten students in treatment outscored the students in the control group by a total of 10 letter sounds a minute. So in the fall, they were roughly at 3 and 4 letter sounds on average. And by winter, the Reading Corps kids were at 26 and the control group was at 16. We also found tremendous effects for our students in first grade, that looking at fall to winter scores for nonsense word, again showing a dramatic difference between the students in the program, which was Reading Corps, and the students in the control. We also then looked at our first graders in the winter on the CBMR assessment, having them read connected text for a minute. And we also found that our treatment students in Reading Corps exceeded the control students, treatment kids reading 41 sounds a minute on average, and the control kids only reading 27 words a minute. So very good skill transfer. Our second and third graders also exceeded the control groups by 6 words a minute in second grade, as well as in third grade. So what we know is that the Minnesota Reading Corps program is replicable. We know that our kindergarten, first, second, and third grade students grow faster than control students that don't receive Reading Corps, and it's at a statistically significant rate. Reading Corps tutoring also has significant impacts with our various groups within our schools. So we learned from the data analysis that our second language students grow at the same rate or higher than our students who are native English speakers. It was effective with all minority groups as well, so very positive results. So thank you for learning about Reading Core. We look forward to having you join us.